28 days later, the rage virus starts in a lab where animal rights activists free chimpanzees being used in experiments and where the animals are infected with an engineered pathogen designed to amplify aggression. The moment a scientist is attacked, the infection jumps to humans and spreads across the UK in days. News can't keep up, the military loses control, and cities empty almost overnight as people either flee or turn. By the time 28 days later begins, the country is already a graveyard, with only scattered survivors hiding from something that isn't undead, but far worse. The virus spreads through blood and saliva, and infection takes seconds. Victims remain biologically alive, but trapped in a permanent state of uncontrollable rage, sprinting at full speed and attacking anything they see. And 28 weeks later, we learn the infected can starve to death, meaning the outbreak can burn itself out if it runs out of hosts. And some people are carriers, they show no symptoms and can live normally, but they can pass the virus. There is no cure, no treatment, and containment fails the moment a single carrier slips through. And in 28 years later, the world has never fully recovered. Britain and Ireland remain under tight quarantine, with isolated survivor communities eking out life on fortified islands or in remote enclaves surrounded by infected wastelands. Although earlier movies hinted the virus might have spread to mainland Europe, 28 years later seems to reset some of that, emphasizing that the infection is still very much contained geographically but impossible to eradicate entirely. And as the world has adapted, some infected have evolved or mutated into new variants such as the alpha types, and there are even moments where an infected woman gives birth to a completely healthy baby. So yeah, that's how the rage virus works. The Last of Us. The outbreak begins with a mutated strain of Cordyceps. It's a real fungus in nature that infects insects and hijacks their nervous systems. In the game's universe, this fungus evolves to survive in warmer temperatures and jumps to humans, with early hints pointing to contaminated food products as the first vector. There's no lab explosion, no secret weapon, just something that slips into the global food supply and spreads before anyone understands what's happening. Within days, hospitals are overwhelmed, cities riot, and governments lose control. The prologue shows this collapse in real time. There's traffic jams, military panic, and civilians turning on each other as society falls apart almost overnight. Once infected, the fungus attacks the brain and takes control of the host's behavior, turning people into aggressive, mindless vectors whose only purpose is to spread the infection. Transmission happens through bites, bodily fluids, and in many areas, airborne spores that force survivors to wear masks just to breathe. And victims don't die immediately. They transform through stages. There's runners, stalkers, clickers, and bloaters, each more dangerous and less human than the last. Quarantine zones are established under martial law, but they are brutal, under-resourced, and constantly failing. Outside the cities, nature reclaims everything, while infected roam freely, making travel almost impossible, and long-term rebuilding unrealistic. And this outbreak is one of the few outbreaks in fiction that feel disturbingly plausible, because the Cordyceps is real, and fungal pandemics are scientifically discussed. And in this universe, there is no cure for the infected, and the only known immunity belongs to Ellie, whose condition can't be replicated without killing her, turning the hope for humanity into a moral dilemma rather than a solution. World War Z. The outbreak appears suddenly and spreads so fast that the world never gets a clean patient zero story. News reports, riots, and collapsing cities stack up within hours, suggesting the infection was already global before anyone realized what it was. The movie hints that early cases were misread as rabies or civil unrest, which let the pathogen slip through borders and overwhelm response systems instantly. By the time governments react, highways are gridlocked, airports are overrun, and entire cities fall in a single day. The infection transmits through bites and blood, and the transformation takes around 10 to 12 seconds. Victims sprint at full speed, climb over each other, and move like a single frantic organism. The infected ignore the sick and terminally ill, which becomes the key clue later, but otherwise, they attack anything healthy on sight. Society collapses because speed makes containment impossible. A single breach in a crowded area creates hundreds of new infected in under a minute. So obviously, military responses fail. Cities are abandoned, and survivors retreat to islands, ships, and remote compounds, while the undead flood urban centers. There is no slow burn, no learning curve. Civilization is gone before strategy is formed. There is no cure, but there is a form of camouflage. Injecting yourself with a deadly but curable disease makes the infected ignore you. The Flood. The Flood outbreak begins long before the events of Halo, when an ancient parasitic organism is accidentally unleashed by the Forerunners. At first, it is studied as curiosity, then as a biological threat, and finally, as an unstoppable catastrophe. The parasite spreads from world to world faster than the Forerunners can contain it, infecting entire planets and turning their populations into biomass for further expansion. As the Flood grows, it forces the Forerunners into a horrifying realization. They are losing war against a living infection that learns from every victim victim it consumes. The flood infects through spores and small infection forms that latch onto hosts and rewrite their bodies in seconds. Infected victims are transformed into combat forms. They are grotesque organisms that can still use weapons, vehicles, and technology, but the real danger is what happens as the flood accumulates knowledge. It forms a grave mind, a hive intelligence made from the minds of countless victims, capable of strategy, manipulation, and long-term planning. This means every scientist, soldier, or leader the flood infects becomes part of its growing intellect, making it smarter and harder to stop with every new host. The foreigners eventually conclude that there is no cure, no containment, and no victory possible, so they build the Halo Array to wipe out all sentient life in the galaxy just to starve the parasite. The flood can pilot ships and deliberately spread itself to new star systems using the technology of the civilizations it destroys. The crust. There is no clear origin. There is no confirmed lab leak, no alien parasite, just a sudden, worldwide infection that appears almost simultaneously across different countries. Within hours, news broadcasts show people attacking strangers in the streets, governments losing control, and the entire cities descending into madness. The only visible sign of infection is a rash in the shape of a cross on the face, but by the time that mark appears, the person is already gone. Civilization doesn't slowly collapse here. It implodes in a single day because the threat isn't death, it's what the infected choose to do while alive. The infection spreads through blood, saliva, and bodily fluids, but unlike zombies, the infected don't lose intelligence or motor skills. They keep their memories, their ability to speak, drive, use weapons, and plan, except every moral restraint, empathy, and social filter is completely erased. Here too, there is no cure, no immunity, and no way to identify someone before they turn, since the change happens almost instantly. And many crust remember who they were and target loved ones first just to maximize suffering. Resident Evil. The Umbrella Corporation secretly develops bioorganic weapons using the Chi virus, a mutagen derived from the progenitor virus, intending to sell living weapons to the highest bidder. Lab leaks, cover-ups, and illegal experiments pile up until the virus escapes into the population of Raccoon City through contaminated water and poor containment. By the time authorities realize something is wrong, hospitals are flooded with violent patients, and the dead start reanimating, and the city spirals into chaos. The government's final solution: nuke the city to erase the evidence, turning a viral outbreak into a state-sanctioned cover-up. The Chi virus reanimates the tissue and mutates the living into zombies and horrific creatures, while later strains like the G virus create even more aggressive, rapidly evolving monsters. Transmission happens through bites, bodily fluids, and environmental exposure, and Umbrella's labs are full of failed experiments that become new threats like lickers, hunters, tyrants, and nemesis. In Resident Evil 4, the threat evolves into Las Plagas, a parasitic organism that doesn't kill the host but controls their mind, creating organized, intelligent enemies instead of shambling undead. Society collapses locally wherever these agents appear because the outbreak are unpredictable, varied, and often engineered on purpose. Every time one strain is contained, another appears, usually stronger and more horrifying than the last. Raccoon City being wiped off the map shows how far governments will go when a bioweapon escapes, and yet Umbrella's research still spreads worldwide. There's no universal cure, only temporary, antivirals, and experimental vaccines that work on specific strains. I Am Legend. A genetically engineered virus called the Crippen virus is created as a breakthrough cancer cure. For a short time it works, until the virus mutates and becomes lethal. What was meant to save millions spreads silently across the globe through normal human contact, and by the time symptoms appear, it's already everywhere. Hospitals collapse, governments fail, and major cities empty out as the infection either kills people outright or transforms them into something else entirely. The virus has two outcomes. About 90% of humanity dies from it, while most of the remaining survivors mutate into dark seekers. Pale, nocturnal creatures with extreme aggression and sensitivity to sunlight. They retain traces of intelligence, they can set traps, operate in groups, but are driven by predatory instincts. Transmission happens through bites and blood, and the world becomes divided into daylight safety and nighttime terror. Society doesn't rebuild because the infected still dominate the cities after dark, making large-scale recovery impossible and forcing the few survivors into isolation. There is no functioning cure for the infected, only experimental attempts like Robert Neville's blood research, and even that comes with moral ambiguity. And the Dark Seekers show signs of social behavior and attachment, suggesting they are not mindless monsters, but a new form of life. Marvel Zombies. This outbreak begins when an infected version of Sentry, he's basically Marvel's Superman with mental health issues, crashes into the main Marvel universe from another dimension, already carrying a mysterious virus that no one understands. The Avengers rush in to help, get bitten, and within minutes, the infection spreads to the world's most powerful heroes and villains. There's no patient zero to study, no time to react, and no containment possible because the very people meant to stop disasters become the disaster. New York falls almost immediately. Then the rest of the planet follows. The infected here keep their intelligence, personalities, and superpowers, but they are driven by a constant hunger for living flesh. They can talk, plan, set traps, and even feel regret, but the hunger always wins. Once Earth's population is eaten, the zombies realize they are still starving, so they turn to bigger targets. They kill and consume Galactus, gaining cosmic power and turning themselves into planet-eating monsters that travel through space looking for more life to devour. There is no cure, no immunity, and no real way to fight back because the infected are literally the strongest beings in the universe.